Chapter 10, Part 2, page 239, about halfway down the page at the page break. Sometimes I think there are scales in heaven, and for every good thing that happens in your life, heaven balances it with a bad thing. The company had no sooner warmed to Miss Whitlaw than other demons proved just how malicious they could be. 3 days later, Father and I were over visiting with Miss Whitlaw when we heard the tramps and clatter of the demon soldiers. "In here," we heard a voice say. The tent flap was raised by a young demon officer. One of Miss Whitlaw's demon neighbors was pointing at us. "Come along, you two," the young officer said. "We're moving you out." "All of us?" Father asked incredulously. "Just you, Chinaman," the young officer said. "You sabe me?" Father's hands clenched and unclenched, but behind the young officer we could see a squad of demon soldiers. They were not the same friendly ones who had given out bread and taken care of the refugees. These soldiers all wore the same stern, tense expressions and handled their bayonets rifles nervously, as if they were in the camp of the enemy. "I sabe," Father said. "You must excuse," he said to Miss Whitlaw. "Well, I don't sabe." Miss Whitlaw rose in magnificent outrage. "How dare you come poking into my tent and commanding my two friends to leave? How dare you tell the Chinese to leave?" The officer was taken aback. He became a little less haughty. "Ma'am, those are the orders. The Chinamen have to go." "Why, I dare say they make better neighbors than some other folk whom I won't name because I'm a Christian woman." Miss Whitlaw darted a poisonous glance at the demon who had guided the soldiers over here. The demon shifted uncomfortably on his feet. I'm sure, ma'am," the officer said hastily, "but they've got to go. I'm to take them bound up if necessary." Father got up. There was no point getting Miss Whitlaw into trouble too. There were a cast iron frying pan awfully close to her hand, and we now knew just how forcefully she could argue. Father picked up our hats. "Come, Moonshadow." Miss Whitlaw whirled around. "Surely you're not going? You arrived only a moment ago." Father patted Miss Whitlaw on the shoulder. "It's some misunderstanding. We fix," he lied, to make her feel better. "It was a misunderstanding, but we would not be able to fix it. Nobody short of heaven could fix it." Father handed me my hat. He fixed his own hat on his head. "We come back quick." "You come back quick as you can, you hear me?" Miss Whitlaw said. I nodded. The squad was guarding other Tang people who stood with their gear on their backs or in wheelbarrows. We were marched through the camp, with demons staring at us, while the soldiers rounded up more and more Tang people. When we got back to the main camp of the Tang people, we found most of the tents already struck. The company was loading our stuff onto our wagon. There were more soldiers there, standing with rifles at the ready, waiting for some outbreak of rebellion. From the way the demon soldiers acted, you would have thought each of us had a knife up his sleeve. A long procession of Tang people, many on foot, marched along Van Ness Avenue past the gutted mansions of the rich. What the earthquake had not destroyed, the fires had. At the end of Van Ness, after several foot-weary miles, we came to a warehouse. Except for Uncle, myself, and Handclap, who rode the wagon, the rest of the company had walked. Red Rabbit already had to carry several wagon loads at the same time. Somehow, he did it. But then the very next day we were moved to a parade ground at an army fort near the entrance to the bay, the Golden Gate. I can't remember everywhere we moved or when, but I think Thursday morning we were moved to the golf course at the Presidio, another army base slightly to the east of the Golden Gate. It was as if the demons couldn't make up their minds. Because it was hard to get fodder for Red Rabbit, the demon soldiers now gave us bread and water reluctantly, let alone fodder for our horse. We sent Handclap south with the wagon to some of our kinsmen. Uncle should have gone, for all this moving around was hard on him, but he was needed to help some of the other leaders of the Tang people figure out what to do. Last year, the demon officials of the city had tried to move the Tang people out of our old area to a place called Hunter's Point in the southern part of the city, where some Tang fishermen already had a camp. It was now rumored that the demon officials were going to make us rebuild the Tang people's town, not in our original location, but down at Hunter's Point. And yet every other ethnic group in the city was going to be allowed to return to its old home site. Finally, we were moved back to the parade ground of the fort near the Golden Gate. Uncle bore this uncomplainingly, because, though he was sore all that evening, in true hardship he could be a source of immense strength. By that Friday, we had dwindled for some 25,000 of us to only a few hundred. Many Tang people had just got disgusted and left for points east, south, and north, where you weren't herded around like a flock of sheep by a shepherd who couldn't make up his mind. But the few hundred who stayed were the hardcore of the Tang people, the stubbornest, orneriest individuals who were getting tired of being pushed around. Someone had to stand firm. We pitched our tents. They were quite brown now and no longer a bright purple, for the fourth time in 4 days. Nobody spoke too much. Father jammed his hands into his pocket, watching White Deer wash the rice. We'd let ourselves be pushed around like a bunch of stupid oxen. Why don't we do something? White Deer shrugged. What can we do? They have all the guns. Father spat contemptuously on the ground. That's what we always say when there's trouble. And what would you do? Take them all on? The superior man rises above such squabbles, White Deer reminded Father. Father glanced toward the tent where the old, wise heads of the tank people had gathered to work out some strategy. You could hear their voices rising. They sound like a bunch of old hens, Father said. They're trying their best. White Deer slammed the lid down on the pot. What's eating you? I'm sick. I'm sick of greed and stupidity. You're just sick of people. White Deer planted his fist on his hips. Maybe I am, Father grumbled. It was very late in the evening when Uncle came back across the grass, looking very tired but smiling grimly. He had had to store away his heavy chair because of all this moving around, so he sat down on an old crate instead. But he did it just as majestically as if it were his throne. He poured himself a cup of tea from the tea kettle we had kept boiling all that day. He sipped it while we all sat or stood around, waiting for him to speak. When Uncle finished his tea, he arched his head, grimacing as he scratched the underside of his chin. I think we have them, he said with a self-satisfied air. What magic did we come up with? White Deer asked. It was there all the time, only some of those old fools were afraid to try it. I guess they were afraid of making any kind of trouble. Uncle fished into his pocket and pulled out a handful of coins. He dumped them by White Deer's boots. There's your magical weapons. There's all the charms and spells you need for these demons. We Tank people own 1/3 of the land in the Tank People's town outright. For instance, we own the land that our company was on. The demons can't tell us to move off it if we want to live there. Even they have to follow their own laws. And as for the other 2/3, well, did you ever stop to think how important we are to the demons? We run a lot of businesses and services they need. If we were to leave this city completely, their whole economy would be wrecked. But we don't want to go, I protested. That's not the point, Moonshadow, Uncle said. All we have to do is threaten to go. They let us rebuild the Tank People's town in the old place, or we go to some city where they'll appreciate us. Yes, White Deer agreed, warming to the idea. Some city like Oakland or Los Angeles. If you name their rival cities, it will make it twice as hard for them to bear. That's what we figured. It's too bad, Father observed, that you have to appeal to their sense of greed. That's the way it is with demons, Uncle snapped. That's the way it is with most men, Father said. I didn't see the meeting that Uncle and some of the other elders had with the demons who ran the city. The demons tried to bluster and threaten, but Uncle remained calm throughout it all. He played his hand with a confidence that would have done credit to Lefty when he was gambling. Some of the more stupid demons were inclined to let us go, but some of the others, the men who really ran the city and handled the money, knew that if they lost us, their pocketbooks would be hurting. Their hearts and consciences might be as hard as flint, but their pocketbooks were as sensitive as a cat's whiskers. To make a long story short, we won the same rights that the demon citizens had in rebuilding on their own sites. We sent out a call then, a call that was heard all around the demon land. Lefty's brother-in-law came down from Sacramento. He was a stonemason. White Deer's youngest brother came all the way north by train from Los Angeles. He was a carpenter. Handclap's young cousin, twice removed, came all the way from Colorado. He had no skills. He just had a strong back, but that was at his elder cousin's disposal. Uncle even got money from some kin and friends in the eastern provinces for whom he had not heard in 20 years. And we were not the only Tank people with kinsmen and friends. Every day the men came in by the dozens, dusty, tired men who had journeyed by foot and by wagon when they could not afford a train ticket. They would sit for a moment, stretch their legs, revealing the holes worn into the soles of their boots. They would be covered from their boots to the crowns of their hats with dust. They would accept a cup of tea with a quiet nod of thanks and maybe smile and maybe make a joke. And after they had finished their tea, they would pitch right in. They might work 16 hours a day without pay, expecting only the food they ate and the straw mats they slept on. We were friends and kinsmen in trouble. The company's days were filled with a cheerful shouting and singing and swearing and hammering. We were putting up a new building, one made of stone and guaranteed to last a century. It was hard work, but it was exhilarating, the kind of feeling that comes from being alive and taking part in some great common enterprise. Only Father seemed strangely unmoved by the experience. He worked as hard as everyone else, but he did so without spirit. Whenever Uncle talked about building an extra large room for Father to work in, Father always kept very quiet. Finally, 4 months after the earthquake, Father came by and found me helping to mark off wood for handclap to saw. The Whitlaws are leaving today, he said. I told them we'd say goodbye. Poor Miss Whitlaw had lost her house in the fire, and so had lost her chief financial support. The money in her cash box was meant to help Robin through college. Miss Whitlaw's land might be worth something once the city was rebuilt, but that meant holding on to it for quite a while. In the meantime, she would have to support herself some other way. Miss Whitlaw had borne her losses with a courage that I had come to expect of her. She had cheerfully taken a job as a housekeeper to some demons over in Oakland across the bay. I put down the pencil and ruler and followed him without a word. We both washed up silently and put on some clean clothes. As we walked through the city toward the park, we could hear the incessant banging of hammers and the wheezing of saws. Wherever you went, you saw the same wooden frames going up, like the skeletons of houses waiting for their wooden flesh to be attached. It was a city waiting to be reborn. Father swung his head to the side to avoid being hit by a plank that a hurrying demon carried on his shoulder. He stared after the man. Look at him. I don't think he's learned anything from the earthquake. He's going to try to make things just like they were until the next earthquake comes along. And then he'll just build another one. We walked along for a while. Houses don't mean much. It's the people inside them that are important, I said. Father grinned sardonically. Yes, and you no sooner get to like those people that they're dead or they move away, like the Whitlaws. But we can meet other people, I pointed out. Father playfully tipped his hat forward so that it shaded his eyes. Yes, and you go on losing those new friends that you make just like you lose the new house you build. Don't you want something better, purer, freer in this life? I don't think there is, I said doubtfully. Father pulled off his hat and smoothed his hair. I think an aeronaut is free. I think an aeronaut may be the freest of all humankind. But you don't have an airplane. I'll build one. And how will you live? I'll put on shows and people will pay to see just how pure and free a man can live. He bit his lips thoughtfully. I think this is my final test, Moonshadow, the final and truest measure of whether I'm worthy to become a dragon again. I felt as lonely as I had that first day on the pier, looking at the crowd of strange tangmen. I was not only losing the Whitlaw, but Father as well. How do you always have to change your life just when it looks like you're finally settling in? I asked. Dragons are able to change shape, and so must I. Do you understand? Father glanced over at me. I dropped my eyes. Do you, Moonshadow? I still didn't answer. Do you? I think Miss Whitlaw must be waiting. I hurried on. Miss Whitlaw had already folded her tent with the help of some of her neighbors and carted it off to the temporary army depot. Most of her things had already been stored away in her employer's home. She was wearing a traveling outfit, a long brown skirt with a kind of short cloak of the same material as her skirt. She had on a big hat, which was held to her head by a scarf that she had tied around her chin. I'm so glad to see you, she said. Robin was sitting on a crate, drumming the heels of her high-buttoned shoes against its side. I went over to her. She cocked her head to one side. You look even darker than you did before. I've been out in the sun a lot, I said. Oh. Suddenly, Robin took the book from her lap and thrust it into my hands. Here, she said. It's a gift for you. It was The Phoenix and the Carpet by E. Nesbit. It's the closest thing I could find about flying, she explained. I don't have anything that nice to give you, I said. It's all right, Robin said, pretending to be indifferent. I read that book so many times I got tired of it. All I have is this. I gave her the carving of monkey that Uncle had given me my first night here. Robin knew what it was, having seen it many times in our stable. By this time, too, I had told her many of the stories about him. He likes travelers. She turned it admiringly over in her hands. Thank you. I got tired of it, too. I grinned. We loaded the 2 suitcases Miss Whitlaw had onto the wagon and drove them down to the ferry building. We would arrange to sell her wagon and horses for her. There was always a need for a good horse and a wagon over here now with the rebuilding. The whole trip was made in a long silence. In the years we had known them, we had grown probably as close as we could to demons. We made small talk in the large waiting room of the ferry building, which had more or less escaped the fire, though they had had to rebuild parts of it. When the ferry boat was ready to leave, the gate, which looked like it belonged on a castle, went up with a rattle of chains. People were getting up all around us, suitcases in hand. Miss Whitlaw took Father's hand between hers. You stay true to your dream, Mr. Lee. I just know that one day I'll be going to a show with your name up on the banner. Then she turned to me. And you keep in touch, you hear, or I will personally walk back across the bay and skin you alive. I guess that goes for me too, said Robin. I hear you, I said. Impulsively, Miss Whitlaw leaned forward and kissed me on the cheek. She was blushing when she stood up again. Excuse me for the liberty, Moonshadow. Robin gave me a quick peck and waited defiantly for me to say something, but I did not. Miss Whitlaw picked up one of her suitcases. Robin took the other. We waited by the gateway, watching them walk through the dark tunnel out into the bright light where the ferry boat rode the waves. They walked over the gangplank onto its deck. The gate came down with a rattling groan. The sailors cast off the rope and drew in the gangplank, and the water around the ferry boat turned white as the paddle wheels on its sides began to turn. I did not say much to Father as we rode back to the Tank People's town. What could I say to a man whom I had come to love and respect, but who wanted to leave me? That night, Father got Uncle alone, and I sat down by them. Father turned to me. Moonshadow, you once asked me who or what caused the earthquake. I don't know. It could have been gods, or dragons, or demons, or it could have simply been a natural event. It doesn't matter, supernatural or natural. It means the same. This life is too short to spend it pursuing little things. I have to do what I know I can and must do. Uncle banged his fist on the arm of his chair. Not that darn dream again. Dream or not, I can fly, Father said matter-of-factly. I can build a flying machine. Uncle looked grim. Even assuming you can build a flying machine and then make money flying it, what will you and your family eat while you're building the machine? It's time I thought of myself, Father asserted. Uncle was scandalized. Supposing your father and mother had thought that, or suppose their fathers and mothers had thought that before, that's cheating. Father sagged in his chair and rested his hands on his knees. A superior man admits the truth, Uncle snapped. I could see Father was beat. He hung his head for the longest time, staring down at his hands. I could only think of some immortal who had suddenly woken one morning to find himself in a man's body and realized he was being punished. For the second time in my life, I made an important decision to be with him. I want to fly too, Father, I said. Stay out of this, Uncle snapped. Pardon me, Uncle, but you brought me into this. I looked at Father again. We should build the flying machine. Maybe you can make a living doing it. And while we're building it, we'll both get jobs. We'll all manage somehow. Father straightened a little. Despite what everyone says? A superior man can only do what he's meant to do, I said. Uncle laughed scornfully. Don't give me that nonsense. He's the only one I hear talking sense, Father said. Don't expect to come back here, either of you, Uncle warned us. He was hurt by our leaving him a second time. I won't have anything to do with fools. Please let me go with you, Father. I won't be any trouble at all, and you'll need help. Father put his hand on my shoulder. Yes, I know I'll need help. I was hoping you'd come along. Why didn't you ask then? It's not something you can ask. And we'll go together, I said. Uncle looked at both of us, both hurt and confused. Why? He asked. Why? It's something we both have to do, I tried to explain, but it was like trying to describe colors to a blind man. Uncle shoved his chair away from us and got up. Get away from me, he said. I was sad about Uncle, but with Father's arm around me, I felt a warm glow inside of me even so. He was Windrider, and I was his son.